I'll be your captain for this flight. Thank you to our cabin crew helpers and our passengers for today. My name's Alex Whittles. I'm a BI consultant from Purple Frog. Contact details are on the screen. Happy to take questions as we go through the session, or I'll have some time afterwards to answer questions. Or if there's anything we can't cover today, then I'll be down on the Power BI Sentinel stand by the entrance for the rest of the session, the rest of the conference. Bit about me, as well as running Purple Frog and Power BI Sentinel, I'm also on the SQL Bits Committee, so on behalf of the committee, thank you for being here. Data Platform MVP, and I spend my life doing data analytics, architecture, system design, and helping companies really get a handle on managing their data. This is a sponsored session by Power BI Sentinel. I am not going to give you a sales pitch. We're talking about the process and thought process around governance in an organization. Now, part of the reason why we created Power BI Sentinel was to solve some of those problems, so I will point out where it can help you. But the point of this is not to say you have to go and buy it, it's to set your thought process around what we need to do about thinking about planning our Power BI environment, especially as we start thinking about migrating to Fabric. So why is governance important? Trust. If your users do not have trust in your data, they will not use your reports. The only way to get adoption in your reporting environment is to build their trust in the data, the infrastructure, and the platform. That requires consistency. Consistency of data, consistency of calculations, consistency of availability. If it's not available and they can't trust that it's going to be available when they need the data first thing in the morning, they're going to use their own Excel hell-based solution. It's your responsibility to make sure the systems are there when they're needed with the right data, with the expected results consistently. But also transparency. They need to have confidence of where that data is coming from, what data is being used to create total sales, number of customers, customer churn, whatever it may be that you want to calculate. There needs to be consistency in, or transparency in the flow of data through your organization. You've got data in lots and lots of different places. Which one is the trusted source? And being able to answer questions from your users as to why a calculation is the way it is very important to help buy their confidence in your platform. But also transparency of who can access data from a security perspective, which leads into regulatory security and compliance. Who has access to what data, from where, and when, and how? Only then can you really accurately and honestly answer questions to the powers that be that you have control over your environment. Now, whether that may be GDPR, Sarbanes-Oxley, ISO, SOC, does not matter, whatever is relevant to your industry, as Power BI professionals, we are responsible for being able to answer those questions about what is happening in our environment. There are 3 stages to this: planning, monitoring, and fixing. You can't fix stuff if you don't know it's broken. You don't know it's broken unless you're monitoring it. And what do you monitor? What do you know what it should look like unless you've planned for it and have an understanding as to what you are aiming for as an architecture? Now, this is planning for, in the Power BI context, what workspaces you're going to have, where they're going to be, what the security model is going to be, who has access to them, who has write access, read access, etc. Once you have a plan on what you are trying to achieve and how you want to manage your Power BI environment, then you can start monitoring it to make sure it aligns with that plan. And planning is one of the hardest parts because no one plans a Power BI environment. What happens is that one person gets Power BI and they like it, usually in finance or marketing or whatever, and they tell someone else and they start using it, they tell someone else, they start using it. Someone creates a workspace because it seems like a good idea, they name it how they want to name it, they give security permissions to everyone because it's easier. And this spreads, and you end up in the new world of Power BI hell. Now, the one thing we do not want to do is replicate Excel hell in Power BI. At some point, it gets to the point where you've got enough information and data and reports and workspace sprawl that you have to take a look at it and think, how the hell are we going to manage this mess? And then we have to try and rein it back and think, how are we going to retrospectively restructure that? If you are lucky enough to be able to make that decision before you end up in Power BI workspace sprawl hell, then please, please, please do yourself a favor and start planning it now, before it becomes a problem. So when we think about what our ideal, when I use Power BI, I am talking about Power BI and what is becoming Fabric. Fabric adds a huge amount of potential future complexity to what we're doing, but it also has an impact on how we want to plan our Power BI environment so that we can plan for that growth in the future. So when I use the term Power BI, I am referring to everything in a future context. So what do we want our Power BI approach, our whole high-level architecture to look like? I really like a 3-layer architecture. We start out with the old school, typical, what we have always known as BI professionals, our centralized BI team on the left. Now I've got here a data warehouse. Now whether it's a data warehouse, a data lake, a Delta Lake, operational data store, it does not matter. It's whatever centralized data you have in the organization that is managed by your core central data team. It is highly governed, highly managed, relatively slow to adapt and change, but it is trusted data. Now historically, those reports may take weeks or months to create, change, release, test, etc. So people in the business want data now. So what do? They completely bypass that, go and talk to their mate in a different department who can give them a spreadsheet, and they create a report, and that's how we end up in spreadsheet hell. Well, now with Power BI, we have all sorts of data modeling techniques, a direct query over data sets, live query, etc., direct lake now in Fabric. So we can now have multiple levels in Power BI, where not only can we create departmental or team-based reports off our centralized data sets, and then individual self-service reports in their personal workspace off our data sets, but we can also use direct query composite models to create departmental enhanced data sets that layer on top of the centralized data set and reuse all of the 90% of stuff in there that they want. And they can just bring in their own data source in their department, whether it's a spreadsheet, a database, SharePoint, whatever, to enhance it. They don't have to come back to the central team to say, please, can you bring this into your warehouse? They can now take the warehouse data and supplement it with their own departmental data and enhance it. So that's the direct query over data sets. And you can create 2 levels, so 3 levels in total, the centralized, the team-based, and then a personalized version as well, a 3rd level, where someone in finance may say, okay, well, my departmental data set or my corporate data set, I've got a spreadsheet with a new forecast or a new set of pricing models or whatever that I want to bring in. I just want to throw it in Excel and bring it in and play with it. Well, they can do that now using, again, the DQ model of layering that data over the top. And you're not going back and reinventing the wheel. You're layering on top of and reusing that core centralized logic. The key for that is that all of that centralized logic contains your core calculations, data that you are trusting as a business, and anything they do on this side is inheriting that, not changing it, not rewriting it. So it becomes much faster to make changes. Now, I've also got, down in the bottom left, centralized non-standard sources, especially with data lakes now, where you've got all sorts of data sources that may be managed centrally, but not brought in to the centralized warehouse, data lake, etc., that you can just expose, almost like a data mesh architecture, where lots of different data sources, and people can bring them together into data sets to combine them together. So with this architecture, you kind of allow a lot more flexibility to your users. But you're always trying to find a balance between the centralization and the flexibility. So the centralized core the core data team, very high levels of governance, standardization, and trust, but slow to react. Excel hell, on the other side, is very fast, but very low standards and very low governance, very low trust. We are trying to find where on that line you need to be. Where do your users need to be? And which data sources are available that sit somewhere on that line, and giving your users an understanding of which data sources fit on the top left or the bottom right, they can then make a choice as to how much they trust what's going on. And we'll talk a little bit later about promoted and certified data sets, which can help with that. So once we know a plan on what we want to do with our workspaces or with our whole approach to data, we need to decide, well, all of this data we're going to put in there, where are they going to be in terms of our workspaces? What is a workspace in Power BI / Fabric? And I have seen it all. I've seen right, wrong, good, bad, and very, very ugly. Is a workspace one workspace per report, and you end up with over 1,000 workspaces? I've seen that. Is it, I saw actually last week, one workspace with 1,000 reports in, and that's it? Neither of those are a good model. Please don't do that. But is it one workspace per department, one workspace per team, per project? It could be anything. There is no set rule for this. This is down to you to decide how you want to manage it. And it largely comes down to security. How do you want to manage the availability and security of the contents of your workspace to different users? You do not want to go down the route of individual report and dataset permissions. Use workspaces as that grouping level so you can group and batch reports together for easier maintenance. But it's not just security in a workspace. It's what is a workspace for in your whole dev, test, deployment process. In a nice, simple world, a workspace is everything. Create a new workspace, create a report, create a semantic model, throw it out there, give it a bit of a test, release it to users. This is a self-service model. Everything goes in there regardless. When they make a change, they throw it in there, test it, it breaks. Well, it breaks production, but they'll fix it and throw it back in there. This is fine for low priority, low risk reports, largely departmental or self-service. But really, for your corporate core reports, you need to have a little bit more management, adopting the whole .NET DevOps approach to our Power BI world. So an easy option is just to detach dev and test from consumption. So you can create an app within your workspace and use that as the method of pushing the report out to your users. Now, there's various benefits of using an app. One is that it detaches the actual visuals in the workspace from the app. They're stored separately inside Power BI. So you can actually make changes in the workspace version of a report, test it, and only update the app when you're happy that that is ready to go. That doesn't work for datasets, semantic models. They're shared, so be careful of that. But also, apps have their own security. You can decide who an app goes to. Not only security, you can see the app or not see the app, but you can also set within the app which pages can be viewed by different groups inside the app, audiences. So this is better, but it's still not perfect. Really, we want to move to a proper managed environment of dev, test, and prod, where your dev team can make whatever changes they want in the dev workspace. When they're happy, they push it to test. The test team can then look at it. When they're happy, it goes into production. Then you can take this further and say, well, actually, production has its app as well. And so then you get a test from the dataset or semantic model perspective. When it goes into pre-prod, they can make small tweaks to the visuals, make sure that's OK, test that side of it, and push it out into the app afterwards. Obviously, now we have source control built into Power BI. So we've got Git over the top of all this. Now, all of this is managed through deployment pipelines. So you can configure a deployment pipeline. It always used to be no more than 3 stages. You can now have more than 3 if you want to. Is that right or wrong? I'll leave for you to decide. So then you can set different permissions on different workspaces as to who can promote using the deployment pipelines within Power BI to push all of your functionality from workspace to workspace to workspace. And that's not a deploy everything, it's deploy selective reports, semantic models, etc., through to each layer. And because you have different permissions on each workspace, you can enforce the dev team can't promote from test to prod. They can promote from dev to test. You can enforce permissions on who can do what in each workspace. Then we move into the world of Fabric. So we're looking at semantic models and reports. It's quite easy in that world because there's not really much that you can really get wrong. But when we start looking at Fabric, we've got warehouses, data marts, we've got lake houses, we've got Spark notebooks, we've got pipelines, we've got all sorts of stuff going on there now. And the world gets a lot more complicated. You've got machine learning notebooks, etc. So trying to figure out, well, how does our nice, relatively simple model of which workspaces do what and what are they for? Suddenly now we've got to start putting our warehouses and lake houses in there. How do they fit into our workspace structure and model? And there's no single best practice for that. Fabric is relatively new. We're still finding our feet with it. We're trying to figure out how best to structure it. And every environment is different depending on what you want to look at. Trying to understand what that plan looks like is not an easy thing. Now, obviously, all of these sit in one lake. One lake is the storage that covers your entire tenant. And so you can even though you've got data in specific workspaces, one lake allows cross-workspace querying, so you can have shortcuts from one workspace to another workspace, or one lakehouse to another lakehouse, etc. It starts to get more and more confusing with where our data is going and how we manage it. And there's no easy answer to this. You've also got things like mirroring, where you've got, okay, your external Snowflake database or your SQL Server database, and you're cloning it in real time, in like a CDC real-time clone, into a Fabric lakehouse. So you can then basically use your Snowflake database in Snowflake. You've got a real-time copy of it inside your lakehouse in your workspace, and you can just query the Fabric version as if it were your live Snowflake. Question? Is mirroring in full production now? Mirroring for on-prem, is it live now? I believe it's still in preview. So the question was, is mirroring SQL Server to Fabric live? I believe it's still preview. I don't have a date for GA. I believe there are going to be some announcements next week at the Fabric conference in Vegas. If anyone wants a trip to Vegas, go there next week. It'll be a great conference. I'm expecting quite a few announcements there, so keep an eye on the announcements there for what's going on. There's going to be a whole lot of announcements about the roadmap, what's going into GA, what's in preview, etc. So keep a lookout for that. It's coming. Put a date on it. Who knows? I may know. I couldn't possibly comment. There's a lot of good stuff coming, and coming relatively quickly, but I can't tell you what's coming when. I have to leave that for the Microsoft team next week. But yes, this is part of the problem with managing and planning your Power BI and Fabric estate. It's changing every week. We're used to Power BI changing and releasing every month with new functionality. Well, now it's even faster than that with Fabric, because it's not the desktop tool, it's all in the service. They can change it whenever they want. Every week there's tweaks and changes, new functionality coming out, and the dev roadmap of Fabric is long. There's a huge amount more coming, whatever's there now. So whatever your plan is, having one eye on where you think it's going to go is a little bit of a get your crystal ball and figure out what you think a governance strategy is going to look like, bearing in mind what you don't know about in 6 months' time. You don't have an easy job. We don't have an easy job. Anyhow, obviously, we also have Git integration with our Fabric entities as well. So from and Git within Power BI and Fabric. In Fabric, you're not going to get self-service users creating your warehouses and lakehouses. I mean, you may do, but unlikely. So that's going to be controlled by your central data team, and you trust them to use Git. They understand Git. They understand DevOps processes. And it makes a lot of sense to use Git and have that as a standard practice with your warehouse, lakehouse, notebook, etc. When it comes to your Power BI reports, again, we look at the 3-level architecture of our users. On the left-hand side, it makes a lot of sense to have your centralized team using source control. But then you get your departmental users. Then you get your self-service users. Who has a CFO who knows how to use Git? No one. Who has a head of marketing who knows how to use Git? No one. So although Git is a really powerful and long overdue integration into our world, it is not for everybody. Figure out who should be using that and who should not be using that, and set your expectations accordingly. Okay, so we know we've got our different warehouses, lakehouses, data marts, yada, yada, yada. Well, it's not quite that simple, is it? Because within those, you have dev, test, and prod. You may have one for your data layer and one set for your reporting layer. So even with 3 simple data marts, you end up with a lot of workspaces. Now, are these workspaces, or are they just different lakehouses in the same workspace? Well, I don't know about you, but with the Fabric interface, everything's listed in one long thing. It's quite difficult. If you start putting everything all in one folder, it gets quite messy. Now, if you've seen folders, I believe folders are coming in preview. Is that preview now? I don't know. Where you will be able to subdivide up components in your Fabric workspace into different subfolders for better management and visibility, which is a really, really powerful feature and will make it much easier to do this. The problem, though, is that your baseline security is on a workspace level. So you need to think about the next level down if you do that. You don't want your prod users having access to your dev or your test lakehouses. So again, it's not an easy thing to plan. So let's think about security. How do we manage security and plan security in our Power BI workspace world? First of all, Entra groups, Active Directory, whatever you want to call it these days. It'll change the name again next week, I'm sure. Groups are critical. Do try and avoid allocating individual permissions for individual users. It's easy, it's quick, anyone can do it. But what happens when that person leaves and a replacement comes in? How do you give that new person access to everything they need? You've got to go through every single workspace and figure out what that user had permissions to and replicate it for the next user. It's easy to give a permission, but it makes your lives very, very difficult from an ongoing management perspective. If you allocate it via AD groups, then as long as your IT department clone the groups for the new employee, you're golden. Nice and easy. It does add further problems, though, which I'll get to later on. But it makes it very easy to clone users and guarantee they get the right reports straight away on day one. But we also talked earlier about the dev, test, prod side of things. You can't just have one AD group per workspace. You need to know who's got access from a developer perspective, who's got access from a testing perspective, who can write, who can read, things like that. But also from a consumption perspective, those viewing reports, can they just view existing reports, or can they build new reports on top of datasets, or new datasets on top of datasets, like we saw with the 3-level hierarchy? So if you're a member, contributor, or an admin of a workspace, you automatically get the build permission, so you can build new datasets on top of other datasets. If you're a viewer, you don't. What you do not want to do is allow someone to build new reports by giving them contributor or member access, because that means they can do all sorts of other stuff. But against a particular dataset, there's a specific dataset permission called build. So you can go into that dataset, give them build, and it means they can, in their workspace, build a new dataset layering on top of the other dataset. So managing the kind of the security for that, again, is quite important. And then when you think about row-level security, it's not only who can access a report or a dataset, but what data inside that can they access? Can they access all of the data or only some of it? How is that managed? And again, try and manage that through automated metadata Active Directory. We'll look at that in a second. Who's heard of One Security? A few people. So, we look at Fabric. And the first question, because everyone knows One Security is the fundamental security layer in Fabric, and that's not in place yet. Therefore, Fabric has no security. Is that right? That's what most people think. And to be fair to, well, Microsoft made a real boo-boo in announcing One Security when it wasn't in place. Because everyone thinks, well, One Security is not there, therefore there's no security in Fabric. I can't create a lakehouse because it'll be open to everyone. That is not the case. However, what is currently in place in security in Fabric is going to evolve when One Security does come in. So, let's take a step back and look at how Fabric security works. It starts out with workspace permissions, same as before. When you give access to your workspace, you are giving access to your, semantic models, not datasets, reports, and separately apps. But also now, if you give access to your lakehouse and your warehouse. So if you have a viewer of your workspace, they cannot access your lakehouse information at all. Any other permissions, they get full access. That, to me, is somewhat dangerous. So be very, very, very careful where you're putting your lakehouses, because if you have a contributor to your workspace from a reporting perspective, they have access to all of your files and data. There is, however, another level of security with item-based security, where in Fabric, you can go in there and basically say, what permissions do you want to have on a lakehouse, a warehouse, or a notebook perspective. But this is not internal to the lakehouse. It is literally on or off at the moment. So if you've got a viewer of a workspace, you can also grant them access to the lakehouse if you want to. So do we have security in Fabric? Absolutely, yes. Is it one security? No, but when one security comes in, it is essentially adding row-level security into the Fabric lakehouse and warehouse. So if we think about a lakehouse, you're throwing loads of files in there, you can set permissions on a file, and that is essentially all the data and rows in that file, and that will propagate through, acting like row-level security, all the way through that lakehouse and your semantic models and reports that access it. So you define it on the bottom level on a file basis in your lakehouse, and everything else just flows through. So that is the one security thing that is coming but is not there yet. So if you want to have row-level security in a Fabric item, you need to apply it at the moment on your semantic model. But at some point, you'll be able to bring it back to your one-lake storage layer. Does that all make sense? Everyone's fully okay with Fabric security. Amazing. Okay. Right, so let's have a look at row-level security in a semantic model. You can easily say, okay, well, I've got a data set, give access to that person. Well, actually, there's someone in a different department who wants to see half the data. Let's create a new data set, pare it down, and give it to them. You end up with 20 different data sets, all with the same logic, same structure, but reduced data inside them. Is that a good or a bad thing? How difficult does that make your management job to actually manage all these data sets? What we want to do is say, well, okay, in a retail environment, we only want to give the sales access. Actually, for the sales director, they can see everything. But for regional sales managers, then we want to say, in that region down there, we only want regional managers to see their region. Well, in row-level security, we apply the security to that dimension, and it applies to both fact tables that is linked to it, if you set the filtering right. So we can basically put some security in that region table that says Mary has access to north and east, and David has south, etc. And that's hard-coded. We can create roles, which is north, east, south, and each role says, okay, does this region match north? Yes. Does it match east? Yes. As long as that user is in the right role, they'll be able to access the right regions, and they can see the data. Now, the beauty about row-level security is it is embedded in the core foundation of your semantic model. You cannot violate it. You cannot get past it. You cannot disable it. It is there. It is trustworthy. It is in place and secure, if it's implemented correctly. Caveat. The problem with this is it's very simple to implement, but it's hard-coded. It's difficult to maintain, because every time a new regional manager comes in, you've got to then go and update the security, and you're busy, you haven't got time to do that, so they don't get access. So usually, we make this metadata-driven. We'll bring in a list of users. We'll bring in maybe from Entra, Active Directory, a list of group membership, or wherever it may come from. And we'll create a mapping table of this login email address has access to those regions through this bridge table. And as long as that is data-driven from a source, for some customers, we bring it from Active Directory. For some customers, it comes from a source database system. Some it's through a Power App. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as it's metadata-driven. And when you log into a report into Power BI, you look at a report. It looks at the email address that you're logged in as, maps it against that user, finds out which regions they can access, filters the region table. That propagates through the entire data set. Now, any other report that are linked to this will inherit that, guaranteed. You can't violate it. This is a really powerful model. It means you can have one data set servicing a huge amount of reports. The one thing to bear in mind with this is we talked earlier about the multi-layer data sets in direct query mode. When you do that, if you build another data set on top of a row-level security model, and you combine multiple data sets and data sources together in that secondary model, row-level security is not necessarily enforced in that new model. It will propagate back through to the row-level security for the one that was defined, but it won't propagate through your other data sources. So let's say in here we had another table that came from Excel, and we build a new direct query data set on top of this, bring this in, and hook it into my forecast data. Well, the row-level security will apply to sales and budget, but not forecast that came from Excel, because that data is not in the core underlying RLS model. So just be a little bit careful with direct query composite models, because it can give you the illusion that row-level security is working, but you can write a bit of DAX to override it. So the next thing we need to look at from a security perspective is data loss. Fine, you've got data being secured by user, but let's say someone's about to leave your company, they run a report and decide to download all the data before they abscond. Well, there's two ways we need to manage that. One of them is using sensitivity labels. So these are the labels that we actually have inside Purple Frog. We have a public label. We have an internal use. So if I email accidentally a spreadsheet to a customer or a sales lead that shouldn't go to them, yeah, they'll get the email, but they open it and they can't see it because it's encrypted, because they're not logged in with a purplefrogsystems.com email address to O365. Purple Frog Confidential, I can specify specifically who in the business I want to be able to see that report. Client Confidential, we can say for a particular customer. The only people that can open that document are logged in using a purplefrogsystems.com email address or the client's O365 email address. Now, this is not a Power BI thing. This is not a Fabric thing. This is a Microsoft 365. So this is not a Power BI admin. Go to your Office 365 admin and plan this for your entire estate. It applies to Excel, Word, PowerPoint, even Outlook, and obviously Power BI. But once you set a sensitivity label, you can add controls. You can't print this document out. You can't email it. It adds a header or a footer or a watermark. You can't, so you can work out, you can define who can do what with it to basically mean even if it does get exposed, it's not a problem. And this has been really core to us getting our ISO 27001 security certification, is we have this on by default. Holly, when's your ISO session? Oh, sorry, you missed it already. Holly's done a session on ISO and information security. Watch the recording when it comes out in a few weeks. But this is really useful to help manage that security because it's secure by default. So if someone does expose data, the impact is less. But obviously, it's not Power BI, it's over your entire organization, so don't underestimate the complexity and impact of implementing this. But it is very powerful. The next thing we can do is, okay, we've secured data, we've tried to minimize our data sets, we've tried to get the workspace structure and the security so the right people can see it, but you still end up with a lot of data sets in your organization, and we need to give some help to our users to understand which is the right data set to use for the right purpose. And that's where we can use certified promoted flags. Now, this is not any kind of security enforcement. It's really just advisory. Any developer or anybody that creates a Power BI report can flag their report as promoted. And that's their way of telling all their colleagues, look, I know I've got 30 data sets and 30 reports here, but actually these 3 are the ones that I recommend you to use. So those go to the top. Those are the ones that you should look at by default at first. Then you have centrally managed certified data sets, where we as admins say, actually, of the 300 promoted data sets we've got, these 10, these are our real core, trusted, centrally authorized, centrally tested, certified data sets that we absolutely want people to use as their primary source of data. Only workspace admins can grant this. And they bubble right to the top. So if someone's in Excel or in Power Query or in Power BI Desktop and they want to write a new report or they're looking for a data set, they'll see the certified ones at the top. That's the one they should use. So there's 2 aspects of this. One is actually doing it. The second is giving some advice and helping your users understand what this means. How do they know the difference between these 2? Is there a question? Is it frustrating that you can't disable the promoted status? I have never come across that frustration. Literally, you can't remove it, or... Right, I'm with you. Okay, so there's no way of stopping a developer or a report creator from promoting their data sets. I completely agree, but that's the purpose of it, is that promoted flag is the remit of the person creating the data set as to whether they think it's promoted or not. That's why they have certified, because that's centralized. So I mean, I suppose that's an education piece in your organization is don't trust promoted. If everyone's promoting every data set, there's no point in having it. Yeah, completely get you, actually. I'm surprised, actually, there's not a flag field to turn that off, but I've never looked for it, so interesting. Okay, good point. And this comes down to this is not a best practice. These are tools at your disposal so you can help structure how you want to manage your Power BI environment. You use these however works in your organization. So with all of these tools, we kind of start having a bit of a plan on what we want to try and achieve, how we're going to plan it, how we're going to structure it, how we're going to make the whole system look and make it accessible. The problem with Power BI is once you've done that, how do you monitor it to make sure it's doing what you want? You know it should only ever be AD groups being given access, but how do you check that? What if someone's going rogue and giving permissions to each individual person? How do you manage that? You need a monitoring process. You need to be able to monitor security, who's got access to stuff. You need to be able to monitor who is actually accessing stuff. Monitoring data lineage. All these different things are critical to really getting a feel for what's going on inside your organization. And there's various ways of getting access to this information. So within Power BI, you have the usage metrics report. Is it good? Is it bad? I'm not going to comment. It gives you 30 days of data. Now, an audit log for 30 days to me is not enough, but it is there. This will show you not who's deleting, creating, editing, updating, downloading, but who is consuming your report. So at least you can monitor the consumption. You've created a new report or a new workspace. Is it getting any traction? Has anyone bothered using it in the last month? This is your tool to be able to check that. There is a data set behind this. When you first view this, it is locked to a single report. But if you expand the filters pane, you can remove the report ID GUID, and it expands it to the workspace. But it is workspace only. One of the tools we have in Power BI Sentinel is we extract this log and export it into your own Azure SQL database. We are working, hopefully in a few weeks, we'll release the ability to push it into your Fabric warehouse as well. And that means we can store years' worth of data. So we can really start monitoring adoption trends over time by user, by department, by report, by workspace. But this isn't just consumption. It's not just viewing. It's analyzing in Excel. It's creating, deleting, updating, who's connecting to Git, who's creating a workspace, who's creating a lakehouse. It's Fabric audit logs as well. So everything that's going on inside your organization is stored permanently in your database so you can monitor it over time. So it puts you in control of monitoring and seeing what's going on. You can access this. There's an API to get the data. All Sentinel does is automate the whole process for you, gets the API data, cleans it up, puts it in a database. Okay, what do we have next? Right, permissions. So within Power BI, permissions is a major, major problem from my perspective. If you want to find out who has access to something, you have to look at every workspace individually. And if we've got customers with thousands of workspaces, it's a real pain. So one of the other things Sentinel does is it pulls out all the permissions and gives you a nice view in a Power BI report of I've chosen a user here, and you can see every workspace, whether they are an admin, contributor, member, viewer, etc. Dataset, app, report. We've actually got a new version of this that also hooks into Active Directory and expands Active Directory group membership into users. So if I've been given access to a workspace via an AD group, it'll show my username in here, along with the name of the AD group through which I have permission. So yeah, it helps figure out where your exposure to data is. What we can also do is show every single workspace whether you've got RLS, sensitivity labels, endorsements configured there. Now we tie this in with data lineage. So you can see at the top, I'm filtering it by server, by database, by gateway. That could be any data lineage aspect. So you can say, right, where's my CRM data going? Where's my sensitive data from my customer table in my CRM going? And these are all the certifications and permissions and configurations and documentation and DAX and Power Query, etc. that goes with that. Another thing we can show you is we talked earlier about one of the aspects of governance is about consistency and availability. Managing dataset refreshes. There's only one thing worse than not having a dataset or a report, and that's having a report that's out of date, that people think they can trust. they're making decisions based on it, and the data's out of date. So if someone else in the business has created a data set and that fails to refresh, only they get notified. So make sure that you get yourself added to every data set notification failure or a group email address, so you get notified from it. The other option with Sentinel is we extract all of that, and we can give you a nice view of every refresh, every failure, every error in one nice pane of glass. I'm not saying this is the only solution. It is one solution, but it is a critical thing to monitor to make sure you know the health of your overall environment. And if someone's created a data set and it's failed and they haven't fixed it for a week, delete it. They clearly don't care about it. Manage it and get rid of that. They have to fix it. Same thing with performance. When is Power BI hitting your source systems? Is that causing a performance hit of your source SQL Server or Oracle or Snowflake? This gives you a heat map of when during the day a different data set's refreshing and when are they hitting your source, so you can start managing it. So let's take a quick look at data lineage. Within the Power BI portal, you can change the workspace view into lineage view. And you can clearly see data sources, which data sets they're coming into, which reports they're coming into. Even good old paginated reports are in there as well. This is really, really nice view. When they brought this in, it made a lot of people's life much, much easier. But do be aware this is workspace specific. Again, it is one workspace at a time. If you've got a database that's used by 20 workspaces, you'll see 1/20th of the view in here, so bear that in mind. One tool to help you get around that is Microsoft Purview. Purview is again, not a Power BI tool. It is a enterprise-wide data governance tool that will look at every single data system you have in your organization. It has access to all the data, so it can scan all the columns for looking for PII data, looking for sensitive data, and can tell you where potentially data sits. It is a big, expensive, complex system. It is enterprise-wide, not just Power BI, but it is very, very good. Talk to the Microsoft team downstairs about it. They will talk to you till the cows come home about how good it is as a system. Because it is enterprise-wide, it does give you some Power BI information, but not a lot of Power BI information. But it does give you data lineage from different sources. We can see the flow of data, what they affect, etc. So it can be quite a useful tool to find that. We also have, so let's go back to the start. So within Power BI, you've got one workspace at a time, very limited view, but it's free and very useful. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we've got Purview, expensive, difficult to implement, takes resource, but really, really powerful system, and ties in Power BI to the whole other data estate. In the middle, we have Power BI Sentinel, which is just Power BI and Fabric. Takes half an hour to get set up and gives you a really detailed view of all the lineage, even down to tables, views, and stored procs in your source systems for your Power BI estate. Right, moving on to, okay, so you've monitored it, you know what's going on, you know who's got access to what, you know what they've done, you know the audit log, you know the dataset refresh failures, etc. How do you go about fixing stuff? I'll skip over that. That's Power BI Sentinel again, shows you edits, all the event logs, what's been changed, etc. If you don't want to use Git, Power BI Sentinel will do an automatic daily change tracking of every artifact in your system. So it will show you from a dataset perspective which measures have changed, which Power Queries have changed, which visuals have changed, what DAX has changed, etc. And it'll give you a full detail of what it was, what it is, and you can choose two dates and essentially do a Git compare, but without Git. So for self-service users, they don't know this is even happening. It's fully automated behind the scenes. This does not replace Git, source control, and DevOps. This covers your whole estate. Some of your users will be using Git. Most won't. This covers everybody to give you a full picture of everything. Once you've got that, it takes automated backup, so you can roll back to a backup if you want to undo something. Or once you've got an old backup, you can use Christian Wade's ALM Toolkit tool to do a comparison against the backup, against production, or if you've got an old version in Git, that to production, and this will allow you to make selective changes and propagate those back to the production system. Really good tool, free, love it. Another great tool is Tabular Editor. Tabular Editor 2 is free, 3 is the paid version, is that right? Thank you. Really, really good tool. Allows you to just connect to a data set or up in the cloud and make specific changes, run DAX queries against it. Really good tool for making changes, for fixing things. Strongly recommended. We've also got, I think Matthias is here today from PBI Tools. He's got a set of PowerShell scripts, PBI tools, that again give you loads of extra functionality that you can do with your Power BI files. There are a lot of tools around that will help you with different aspects of it. There is no single one tool that will cover everything. It's figuring out what you need to help manage, monitor, and fix your environment, find the right tools, talk to people downstairs that can point you in the right direction of which tools you can use. So what is my ask of you? Do not just go blindly and accept your fate into Power BI workspace hell. Protect yourselves, plan for your future, make your future lives easier, and make your future selves thank your current selves. Have a think about what is your strategy around security, workspaces, permissions, Active Directory, and make sure you consider where you may want to go for Fabric going forward, and try and plan for that. Monitor your lineage. Figure out what data is going where. Have you got sensitive data being exposed in a workspace that it shouldn't be exposed to people that shouldn't have access to it? The last thing you want is for your organization to come in and do a security audit and blame you because you've allowed data to go somewhere it shouldn't go. Ultimately, if you're looking after your Power BI estate, you are going to be held responsible. So have some way of managing that and monitoring what's going where. Monitor the security. Who is accessing a workspace or a report? Not just editing, deleting, and creating, but who is consuming it? Do you have a least permission required approach? You can compare the permissions against the usage. If you're given access to 1,000 users, but only 20 are using a report or a workspace, shrink the permissions. Constantly shrink that security footprint to avoid any potential issues. And then plan for problems. What will happen when a data set breaks? What will happen when someone comes to you and the CFO comes to you and says, my report's broken? You never heard about it before because someone in finance created it a month ago. They're now on vacation in the Maldives. Well, you're left to fix the mess. What do you do in that situation? Is that your responsibility? Who do you delegate that to? How are you going to be the hero and look good fixing that issue? Obviously, Power BI Sentinel will solve all of your problems tomorrow and make your life absolutely fantastic. If you want to know more about it, come and see me or the team on the stand downstairs. Also, any feedback as to problems you've got that we can potentially build into the system to help with, we're always looking for feedback. Talking of feedback, please do leave feedback. We need to know, as both a speaker and an organizer, I want to know what you like, what you don't like, what's good, what's bad. Every feedback left, we give a donation to charity. You can choose your charity on the form. And this really does help us guide what you want to see at the next SQL Bits. So with that, a big thank you to our helpers again. Thank you to all of you for coming, and have a great rest of SQL Bits. Thank you.